you're alone on the train, you're alone on stage, you're alone on the train home. Like those moments where you connect with people you like that's really what a scene is.
Live from the Willie Nelson and Friends Museum Showcase in Nashville, Tennessee. It's Music is Funny. Musicians talking to comedians about music and comedy. With your hosts, Raelyn Nelson and Jonathan Bright.
I'm still smoking, I'm so high, I keep toking, I'm drunk, but I'm still drinking too.
Welcome back to Music is Funny. I'm Raelyn Nelson.
And I'm Jonathan Bright from the Raelyn Nelson Band, back with another ridiculous and unnecessary intro. Today we have...
Hari Kondabolu. Hari Kondabolu.
So, Hari, my name's Raelyn, and this is JB.
Nice to meet you, brother.
Hey JB, hey Raelyn, nice to meet you both.
Thank you so much for doing this with us, and I can't wait to hear all about your busy last few months. But we like to start every podcast off with asking you, what is the first music you remember loving as a kid?
Oh God, it's going to be embarrassing.
Oh no, we've had some wild responses to this, so you won't be embarrassed.
Probably Phil Collins and Genesis.
Well, that's not embarrassing.
Oh,
I don't know. I feel like the cool answer would have been, Peter Gabriel's Genesis. But I was a kid and that's what was playing. And I loved everything that Genesis and Phil Collins was doing. I was a kid and it was everywhere. My parents liked it too. But the first CD I got was the best of Phil Collins.
Nice. Well, I always figure if somebody says something uber cool, they're just lying. Because you're rarely your first band ever.
I listened to Neutral Milk Hotel when I was 7, and it changed my life.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
I like all the Elephant Six bands, Yeah, right.
So what kind of music was your mom and dad listening to around the house?
And where did you grow up?
Oh, yeah. Where was that?
I grew up in Queens, New York. My folks, they listened to tons of like Indian music, and a lot of the Indian music, the popular Indian music they listened to were soundtracks to movies. So there was like Bollywood songs, as well as we're in a part of southern India called Andhra Pradesh, and the language there is Telugu, and they have their own film industry too, because India has so many different languages. Each state basically has a different language. So there's also like local but statewide film industries as well, which seems small, but since India is so big, it's still hundreds of millions of people. So it's, huge, like sustainable industries. And so I remember listening to a lot of that stuff, with the soundtracks to movies, whether I saw the film or not. My dad came in the late 70s. He loved Laura, he still does, loves Laura Branigan. Like he basically lists off all the music he listened to when he came to this country as an immigrant in the late 70s. That's still his favorite stuff. Everything he listened to when he got here, Donna Summer, he goes on, Laura Branigan, like all the big hits of that era, like towards the end of the disco era. So there was some of that, and also they were listening to VH1 and MTV and like putting it on in the background because which now seems funny, but they were like in their early 30s. Like it wasn't that strange the more I think about it. You know what I mean? Like whatever was popular at the time, I was familiar with, and we always had music around. But definitely the things that I heard the most was the Indian stuff. And I didn't really get into music till I was like middle school, teenager, like a lot of us. Like when I actually listened to the lyrics and was able to connect it to my life, that's when it probably impacted me the most.
Yeah. And that's a trip. We've talked about it before, how when you start doing on the math on your parents' age in certain points of your life, you're like, wow, they were babies at this point.
Yeah.
It's just like moving here. And if you're a 30 or something, you're going to seek out the hip stuff or whatever is popular, what's going on. Immerse yourself into that. I haven't ever thought about it.
It's really fun. Well, it's also, I just had my first kid a couple of years ago, and I'm 40, I have a kid, and I think to myself, I couldn't have had a kid when I was 28 or 29.
Right.
That's what my parents did. I'm like, I wasn't ready, and so there's so much sympathy of like, you're in a new place, you're figuring yourself out, you just got married, and you're raising a kid. Like it really makes me feel like such a jerk. Like I did not understand what they were going through.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you didn't really start getting into music until junior high or high school. What were those bands? Like what got you?
Oh, I mean, Green Day. That was the first. When people ask me what the first album I bought was, I usually like to say Dookie by Green Day, but the truth is it was that Best of Phil Collins record. I just would rather I would rather say Green Day by Dookie.
Hey, we appreciate
Dookie by Green Day.
We appreciate your honesty on the show for sure.
Weezer was my favorite band forever, and I'm of the era of like after Pinkerton, there is no more Weezer. Yeah. What we're hearing right now is a Weezer cover band. It's not Weezer.
I've heard one of your bits on that.
Oh, I'm cruel. It's just that those first two records, I think part of it is it's like when I think part of it is I miss the sound that they made, but the other part of it is I probably am nostalgic about that time, and I want to listen to them and feel that way again, and I can't, and it doesn't really matter what it is. Like I can't feel 15 and everything's new and everything's excited in the same way again. It can't be that way.
Yeah, you listen to old songs, you kind of get a glimpse, but you can't, it sort of takes you back in time, but you don't feel like that.
No, it's not. You're reliving feelings and memories, but it's not the same as the feeling of this is all new and my mind's opening up. And part of it is that, he was talking about Rivers Cuomo, the lyrics were like stuff people were dealing with in their like early to mid 20s. Like I read about it, like I read the lyrics. I'm like, this is stuff that you talk about when you're more of an adult. So as a teenager, it was also a look into adulthood, which I think is true in a lot of ways. I think about all the media I consumed. A lot of it was trying to figure out what the country was and also trying to figure out who I was in that and trying to figure out what adulthood meant or what masculinity meant. And so that all comes from, like media, and music was a part of that. And I don't, I still listen to music every now and then that like blows my mind, but it's really not as often.
Yeah, I think as you get older, you quit. At least for me, you stop seeking it out. You're like, my hard drive's full. I know plenty of great but every now and then your friend will hit you with something new and you're like, holy shit, there is still good music out there. I just too lazy to go find it.
As we all know, music ended in 2004.
Right.
That's when it ceased to exist to me.
Yeah. So what do you listen? So now do you listen to music on the regular, or do you,
my partner is a musician and we always have music around the house. Like my 2-year-old like knows most of the lyrics to Energy by Beyonce. Like it's wild.
Cute.
Like I mean, I think my partner is one of the main reasons I know what people are listening to. Like I don't think
what kind of music is she making? Or
across the board. Oh, what is she making? She made a lot of she made a lot of different stuff. I mean, she's not a full-time musician right now, but she's been in like pop bands and she's played some jazz and
that's cool.
So she's accomplished.
Classically trained. Yeah, I mean, she's certainly like she's a pianist, like we have a piano in the house and she's fantastic. And so music is a very big part of our everyday, like as it is for a lot of people. And so, but she's like, I don't think I would have known who Bad Bunny was, or if I did, it would be me at a supermarket shazamming what's playing and being like, oh, this is the Bad Bunny they speak of. But I feel like she has and Bad Bunny's not the best example because he's like super famous, but she has a better idea of what is playing now or what people listen to now. And I kind of like, we're about the same age, but she's like, I feel like still has an ear to what's happening and I do not. So that's helpful. And my brother has always like, my brother was in a rap group that toured the world in like the late 2000s, and he like has always known like what's been going since he was in high school. Like usually you hand down music to your siblings. Most of my music at that time was handed up. Like what my brother was listening to is what I learned to listen to in the 2000s. You know, like I didn't know who MF Doom was. I worked at a college radio station and didn't listen to MF Doom. And my brother is the one who like got into all the Def Juck stuff that was happening in New York at the time. And, you know, it was like he was listening to, you know, the Byrds and Zeppelin and all this stuff, and you know, hip hop coming out of New York at the time. Like he really had a great sense of musical history, especially from like the 70s onwards, which I did not have and still don't really have a great grasp of.
Did you ever give it a shot? Music in any form or fashion?
Oh no, man. I mean, when I was like 15 or 16, I wanted girls to like me, and the three options I saw were poetry, music, comedy. The music, the effort to learn an instrument, I just didn't have the patience for it. You know, like just did not. And I would see my friends play. I'm like, I don't think I've never been. I feel like there's something. Like I knew I wasn't athletic, and I also knew that like I don't have the level of coordination I think you need for this. Plus, I don't think I wanted to work that hard. I mean, with joke writing, it's still a lot of hard work, but it's a more familiar form, right? And plus, It's more accessible. And then I started writing poetry, and then I would read poetry at open mics in high school. And when people started laughing at the poetry, I knew that comedy was definitely the route to go.
I was going to ask if you could still pull chicks with poetry, but during that era, I guess was it like the Def Jam poetry kind of thing, the slam poetry?
No,
kind of
God, if at least it was that, it would have been contemporary. I mean, it was awful teenage angsty poetry. I remember, and I was a cornball too, a nerd and a cornball. So I remember I had read the poem Pyramus and Thisbe by Ovid, and I decided to write a poem about that poem to a girl I liked. And really comedy was the only path. There was nowhere else to go. Like realistically, I look at it now, I'm like, there was only one art, considering how you act and the situations you put yourself in, that you could realistically do.
A poem about a poem is pretty comedic in itself, though.
It's so melodramatic. If I remember, I think Pyramus and Thisbe ends with a double suicide. Like what the hell was I talking about? Like I was
Romeo and
15.
Juliet. Romeo and Juliet.
Which when I think about Romeo, somebody wrote a joke about that. I loved it. Just how like they were teenagers.
Yeah,
they were teenagers who took it too far, basically.
Yeah.
Like just we're so in, like, you know what I mean? They're basically goth kids.
Back then. People weren't living as long back then, so
yeah, but still,
teenager. That's a midlife crisis they were going.
They were going to die at 35.
That's
anyway.
hilarious. Back then, it's hilarious. The idea of a crush at that age is a midlife crisis. Is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here comes Romeo with his 13-year-old now showing off.
So, what was your first comedy influence? How did you even know about comedy?
Oh, comedy was something that kind of always played around the house, and we loved Eddie Murphy. Like, not the stand-up, because my parents wouldn't let me see that, but certainly like his stuff on SNL and his movies and stuff. First stand-up I saw that made me want to do stand-up was Margaret Cho. Like, I saw Margaret Cho do stand-up on TV. This is when Comedy Central was still starting. So they just played the same things over and over again. So they played this one Margaret Cho HBO special and this one Janine Garofalo HBO special back to back. And I would watch that over and over and love them both. But like Margaret to me was a sign that, oh, you don't need to be white, black, or Latino to have a voice in this country in any art form, but specifically comedically. Like it was such a, like my mind opened up, like, is this possible? Like she was Korean American, she was an adult, and I'm like a teenage South Indian kid. But to me, it was as close as we had gotten to that kind of form. She was talking about her parents, and she was saying things that were so like wow, like you're saying that in front of people and you don't give a shit. You have so much confidence. And I was just kind of like, I just never seen that before. So that was like the first time I'm like, I want to do stand up. And after that, you know, my influences were, I think, a lot of similar to a lot of the influences of people around my age at that time who got into comedy. Like my God, I loved Chris Rock, loved Dave Chappelle. I mentioned Janine Garofalo. I had Mark Maron. Like, there's so many people of that era that like I listened to. Plus, there was so many Comedy Central Presents specials that would play all the time. So I was also watching a bunch of different styles and figuring out what made me who, like, what felt like me. Plus, I grew up in New York City, so when I got old enough to get into comedy clubs, like I was watching comics that I loved and that I would see on TV work things out. And so it was cool because it wasn't just I was listening to polished work and thinking that's what comedy was. I was seeing the same people I saw on TV live working out material on a Tuesday at the Comedy Cellar. Like that's the part that I feel really privileged to have had because, you know, that's the stuff that if you're a kid growing up in another part of the country, you might see these comics swing through town once a year, if that much, right? And I'm watching all of them work stuff out. I'm learning how, oh, they bomb too. This is part of the process. I mean, that is something, especially when you're like 17, 18, 19, like that's useful to know. Like, because it tells you like, oh, this is an art form built on public failure. That is the only way to succeed in it.
Yeah, for sure. And growing up in New York, did you, before you actually got started in comedy, did you look around and have designs on, you know, if I do this stand up, I might get my own TV show, I might, you know, straight to Hollywood, or was it just straight stand up for you?
I never saw stand up as a realistic option. It's something I loved and I did in high school and I did in college. And, you know, every time I would go to another stage of my life, I assumed stand up would disappear. Now it's time to grow up. This isn't realistic. Like I had that in my head just because there really weren't other examples of South Asians doing stand up. Like Aziz had just started to get famous. Let's see, Mindy Kaling didn't do stand up, but she was on The Office. Russell Peters had been a big comic, especially in Canada and overseas for years, but there weren't other examples. And it was kind of like that, you know, it's already a big risk deciding to be an artist, but being like the first of a thing, there's just so much pressure in being somebody who like, you know, I would not only have to be in it, I'd have to break ground doing it. And that's a much bigger challenge. And honestly, I didn't think it was realistic. Like the biggest example I had of South Asian representation in Hollywood was like Apu. So if that's the standard we had, Apu from The Simpsons, why on earth would I think comedy was for me? But I kept doing it and I kept getting people to come to my shows, and I moved out to Seattle to work as an immigrant rights organizer, which, you know, another high paying profession like comedy. And I was doing comedy at night and people kept showing up to see me. You know, I was doing an hour by the end of a year in this, you know, smaller city in a smaller scene, but like I'd gotten pretty strong. And it was like my first indication, like, oh, maybe this is real. You know, I just didn't trust it until, you know, the moment I knew it was real is when I got asked to submit to the HBO Comedy Festival, which was a big festival back then, you know, before the internet became everything in terms of discovering talent. Like you still went to festivals and that's how you get discovered. And I made the last year of that out of Seattle, which was nuts because it was usually New York and LA at that time. And then I was on Kimmel, and which I never had designs on any of this. I didn't plan on having a career in comedy. I didn't plan on being on television. All those things seemed impossible. So it wasn't, I would daydream just like I did as a teenager, but I wasn't seriously pursuing it. And I feel like I kind of stumbled into it. I was just doing it from my heart because I loved it. I loved the form. I was in Seattle. I wasn't thinking about managers or careers. I did it because I loved stand-up and I loved our Seattle scene and I wanted to build our scene up and enjoy it while I could. I mean, that's what it was. In some ways I think about it, I think it's still the purest performance I've ever done because there was nothing at stake. You know, it wasn't about money. You know, that wasn't a factor. I wasn't getting paid most of the time anyway. Like, it wasn't about fame. What, I'll get written up in the Seattle Times. That's cool, but it's not, you know what I mean? Like, I did it because I love to do it. And somehow that led to a career. And, then it became a lot harder. Once it becomes real, it gets significantly harder. And you start to realize the pitfalls of having a career in art. But when I was 16, 17, the thought of it was so, it was something you daydream about. It wasn't realistic. Like, there weren't any examples for me.
Well, clearly you loved it, because you start off basically saying, yeah, there's no way in hell I'm going to make it doing any of this stuff. But you did it for so many years before any of that popped up. So clear. I mean, it was, I guess, I was going to ask you before you finished, like, well, why in the hell did you keep doing it if you were convinced nothing was going to come of it? But it's because you love to do it.
I love to do it. And then after, all this, like, I ended up getting a manager out in LA. I got into this festival. I still had a job. I was still an immigrant rights organizer. I took a day off from work, went to Kimmel, did the set, flew back the next morning early enough to get back to work, didn't tell anybody. And they figured it out, but I just, even then I was really on the fence. I ended up going to grad school for a year after that, a degree in human rights at the London School of Economics. And I'm like, comedy still isn't real to me. Like, even with that, it hadn't convinced me that this is a real thing. Part of me was still like, be prepared for another career, because this isn't going to last. And then I got flown out to do this show called Live at Gotham that was on Comedy Central. I skipped a week of class. I hadn't done stand-up in like a year at that point, or 6 months, or whatever it was. I had to relearn my act, did it on TV, and then I flew back in time for my finals. Like, I really didn't believe it was real. And that was one of those things, like, if I'm not even doing it, if I'm basically taking the year off and they still want me to do stuff on TV, it's almost disrespectful to all the comics I knew that were busting their butt wanting to do this for a living and not getting anywhere. Folks who were equally, if not more talented than I was, who had been working the road for decades and didn't even get a piece of this. It felt disrespectful to all the people that love comedy as much as I did and were trying to get these things, to just say, I don't want this. They gave me this, but I don't want it. And the thing is, in my heart, I did want it. I just didn't think it was real till I saw it.
Yeah.
So you think you mentioned you thought of some of your purest work you were doing back then. Do you think it's easier to not have an inner critic when you are, like, if you have a job or you are going to college, like with family and friends, you don't have to go, what are you doing? You're like, well, I'm doing comedy. You can at least say, I got a job here, or I'm going to class here. Almost easier just to be, your comedy is just free. But once you have to step into that and make it your profession, I'm sure it got a little, like you said, way more difficult when that's your thing.
Oh my God. When people ask me do I have any hobbies? And I don't know what to say, because my hobby was stand-up. Mm-hmm. And I still want to say stand-up, but I'm like, it's not. Like, that's not what it is anymore. And, when you're doing it as something that's a hobby, you do it for fun. You have your own inner, like, I want to be the best I can be. But it's not so much the inner critic as much as it's the external critics. Who was going to criticize me up in Seattle? Who cared? You know what I mean? So it was almost like, there were no consequences. I didn't depend on this for money. Like, I didn't need it.
Did you have any? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you have any significant bombs in the beginning when you were doing it?
All the time. I remember first time I remember in college, I bombed at an open mic, and it was a college open mic. Like, who cares? But I stopped doing it for 6 months after that, because I was so embarrassed about it. In New York, every show was like, I remember there was a place called the Blah Blah Lounge that lived in Parks, that existed in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I lived with my parents right after college, so I didn't have any money because I was pursuing comedy. So it was 2005. This is before I was pursuing comedy. This is actually during college. I would come home from breaks. I would take the F train to Deep in Brooklyn, which took an hour 15, hour and a half, to do 3 minutes at an open mic in a place I'd never been. And I would go in, and there was it wasn't a comedy open mic. It was an open mic. So there was like a folk musician. There'd be like a dad who would quickly play Born to Run and run back to put his kids down. You know what I mean? And there'd be like, people reading poetry and weird performance art things. I once followed a video of two British women bathing in beans.
Nice.
And then I had to go up and do stand up. Like, so, that wasn't going to work. But those are the memories that made me think stand up wasn't possible. Like, I'm in New York and I got to do all this. This isn't fun.
Was it dried beans or like
no, man,
refried beans?
They were
beans?
like what you'd get in a can of pork and beans.
Like baked beans.
Baked beans.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
I didn't understand the piece.
You can't follow that.
You can't.
Dried
I mean,
beans
no one
would be
could
kind
follow
of fun
that.
though, right? Dried beans.
Dried beans.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to bathe in dried beans. Baked
I guess.
beans. Baked.
It was not my best moment in those early days. So I mean, and also when you don't do comedy every day, when you're doing it like few and far between, as I did when I was a teenager or my early 20s, every single one of those shows has a huge impact, positive or negative. Like, it either makes you feel I can do this forever, or I'm never doing this again. And there's no push to, because it's not like I need to go up the next day. So, it was, New York is the hardest scene to start in. And I'm lucky that I started in Seattle, because my confidence went through the roof. And if I'd started in New York, I certainly would have quit pretty early on.
So how was it when you go to New York, though, from Seattle to do comedy? Was there a transition, or were you sort of prepared for it? I mean, you're from there, but comedy-wise.
Oh, I wasn't ready. I thought I was. So I had 2 TV credits and a manager, and I just assumed, well, that means I'm established, and that means something. And you get to New York, and you realize they don't give a shit about that.
Nobody sent
Like,
for you.
everybody was on TV. Like, and plus the people who weren't, they were so established in the scene. That was their power, was booking a room. And I didn't ingratiate myself at first. It wasn't about the show. It was not only do you have to be funny, you had to hang out after, and people have to get to know you and like you. And I'd never done that part of the thing. If I wanted to hang out with somebody or another comic, it's because I enjoyed their company, not because it would get me stage time. And if I didn't enjoy somebody's company, why would I want to stick around? And apparently that's what I was supposed to do, just to kind of like be a person in the scene. And, I was living with my parents. So again, an hour 15, an hour and a half, coming home at like 2, 3 in the morning for 5 minutes of stand up. And I'm like, I have TV credits. This doesn't mean anything here. And I've imagined that doesn't mean anything. It was like literally starting over. I didn't have to do the lowest rung of open mics, which was cool. But to get like regular audiences with shows, it took a solid 6 months to a year just to feel like I was doing comedy again. So I used to just fly back to New York, or I'd go to the Bay Area where I had friends, and I would do stand up there for maybe a few weeks to remind myself I was still funny, and then fly back to New York with the new jokes I wrote and feel more confident, because I would try new stuff in New York and it would bomb so hard I would give up on it. And I would also have it in my head, I'm in New York, this means something. And it doesn't. Like, that's the thing. Like, it's New York, but you can't treat every single set like it's the one that's going to make you famous. And I think early on, that's what I was doing. And again, I wanted to go back to like, why do I do stand up? It's not for this. So I think the Bay Area and Seattle has always given me that, like, remember why you do this, remember what this is about. And I still go to Seattle a couple of times a year. I book a 40-seat theater. I do an hour of new material from scratch and bomb terribly in front of people that have loved me for a decade. And they tolerate it. They get excited about it, because then when it's on TV later, or if it's aired somewhere, it's like, oh, I remember when that was garbage. I remember when that was the most brutal half-hour experience. And I still go back to Seattle because I know I can be freer there and do stand up in a way that I feel like I can in New York, because it is more competitive and there's less stage time, like quality stage time. Yeah.
Did you have anybody when you say you sort of had to learn the ropes of New York and hanging out and that kind of stuff? Is that something you figured out on your own, or did you have somebody that's basically in your class that was like, "Hey, buddy, if we want to do this, this is kind of how you got to do it," and like giving you tips or leading you along? Or was it just something you figured out?
A little bit of, I mean, definitely I used the internet to find out what the shows were and all that. But there were definitely comics like Baron Vaughn, who's a fantastic comic who's out in LA now. He was on that show Grace and Frankie. He's just fantastic. And he was somebody who was very encouraging and helped me kind of decipher what was going on. My friend Liz Mealy, we became friends a little bit later, but she's always somebody who's, she's like a New York City scene lifer. Like she knows the ins and outs. And by the way, she's killing it right now, which is wonderful, especially when when you really do the work and you earn every single bit of it. It's really sweet to see somebody like who actually oh, no shortcuts. You built this fandom, you built this following. Anyway, neither here nor there. It just feels good to see that, because I remember those shows in New York that were brutal that we were all at. But yeah, that was a lot of it. I had friends, early on that would send me lists of shows they like. My friend Marianne Ways was always really useful. Still books a great show called Butterboy in a venue called Littlefield in Brooklyn. So yeah, I mean, those kind of people, I think you need them. It's really lonely. I mean, it's alone. You're alone on the train. You're alone on stage. You're alone on the train home. Like those moments where you connect with people you like that's really what a scene is.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing in music. It's like Nashville playing music. No, the old saying is it's Nashville, nobody sent for you. And you get crowds of people that, I mean, there's so much talent around. It's like comedians. You've got to be good to impress. And if you're not, nobody's necessarily trying to squeeze you out, but you have to,
right.
You have to elbow your way in to a certain extent to get noticed. It's just so
with
depth of talent.
With music, I've always wondered with musicians, how do you work out a new song? Do you go to like an open mic like we do and play a new song? Do you do it in the middle of a real set?
Well, see, we had this conversation.
Is the song done though? I mean, for the
how would
most
you
part,
know it was? How would you know it was done without an audience? Do you need the audience?
It's great hearing a comic not understand that, because for us, no, it's just such different kind of brains. Because if you're writing a song, you write it until you've got this intro and the outro. There's a chorus and then it's done. Now it might not be great.
There's verses.
It might not be great. You might not know if it's any good until you play it. But rarely we don't.
Like I wouldn't go somewhere and do a verse and a chorus of a song and that's it. Like a 30-second verse and chorus to work it out and feel it out. It would have to be what I think the full thing would be. And then it could definitely change. One of my favorite things about songs is that they evolve and change.
Right. But and that's more of like singer-songwriter acoustic. But when you get to a point, like if you have a whole band, it's generally before you perform it in front of anybody, it's done. And you don't take the crowd response is just either they like it or they don't. You don't go, well, I could tell they weren't digging the bridge. So if we change that around and come back and you guys like write in front of people, it would be like us going up with a chorus and half of a verse and just start playing it and kind of gauge reaction. But people would be completely confused by that.
Yeah.
No beginning.
But that's happened before, right? Like people have had jam sessions where they all of a sudden feel a song. They feel something like, oh, there's something here, right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
but that's not a show in front of people.
I guess it is for certain bands like Grateful Dead and those guys. They have a structure. They're kind of like in jazz players. There's always a beginning and end, and they waver, and the middle's never quite the same. So there's certain genres that but they're not really working it out. They're basically whatever they feel at the time. That's what they do, and they're not trying to record that and take it and make it something. It's like we have a beginning, we have an end. Here's the part in the middle that we can stretch out on. And it's rarely the same for those bands, but they're kind of writing as they go, but it's not exactly the same.
And then one of these podcasts, I don't remember who it was, but one of the comedians asked us if we would just video us writing a song. And we would, but the thing is that it would be
this is how we write songs. But it's literally 20 minutes going, hold on. And then you'll play something. That's how we do. Like they're
Yeah.
It would be
songwriters
so
in town
boring.
there that have meetings many different ways. A lot of the songs you hear on the radio, they'll book a meeting of 4 number one songwriters and get in there and they're like, we're going to write a song today. And they do it by appointment, which is a talent or a skill set that I do not have. They can just
I've
show up.
done it a few times. It's just I just don't want to write those kind of songs to put out myself, because I want to write songs about stuff that's going on in situations that I see people going through, or just something around me. I don't want to go in and be like, we're gonna write a song about a guy cheating on a girl, like I don't have any. I can do it, I just don't have any desire to do it.
Do people ask you the same question they ask comics? Like, where do you get your ideas from? Where do you get your material from? Do you get questions like that?
We do. Where do you get your ideas from?
I mean, to me, I get ideas just like anybody else does. Good conversations, watching, like basically feeding yourself interesting and intelligent things to digest on. And I mean, maybe it's different for you, but I've always seen like the difference between creatives, whether that's like writers or comics or whatever, like people who are creating work, is that they don't let a thought go. Like most people, they have a nice conversation with somebody and that's the end of it. Like there is no, what can I do with this conversation? For a comic, it's like write down the funny points and see how you could recreate some context to work in a public place. When you have a funny thought, it passes. I'm like, oh, that's an amusing thought. If I remember it later, I'll share it with a friend. But as a writer, it's like, I can't, everything is the thoughts I have. I need to write it down. And that's been like more than anything, that has been my hobby / job since I was 15. It's collecting my thoughts. Yeah. So to me, it's more about that collection process than where do you get it from? Like it comes from wherever it comes from, however your brain works, whatever you're around. But it's like, don't lose stuff. Don't tell yourself, oh, I'll remember it when I wake up in the morning. You will not remember it when you wake up in the morning. That trick has never worked. Don't, when you're in the shower, you're like, I'll remember it when I get out of the shower. Get out of the shower and write it down, because you are going to lose it. It never stays as long as you think it will.
I think that's true for written word and lyrics and stuff. I don't know about you, but for me, I get a melody in my head, I just can't escape it. Yeah. It just keeps popping in and popping in and
that's how you know it's good.
And words are, might have a great line and forget, fuck, what was I thinking about that? But the melody, for me, that's where it always starts, either a riff or a melody, and it's just it drives you crazy, and you finally sit down and bang it out and go, oh, I could make that into a song, and it just attacks.
That's amazing.
So many people write so many different ways. Some people put pen to paper every morning at 10 o'clock. They pick up their guitar and write just to get it out. And that works for a lot of people. I can't ever do that.
You have to just to exercise it.
Yeah. And that makes sense, but I'm always editing. So if I'm just trying to write out a thought, I couldn't even get a thought written out all the way before I go, hold on, I could say it a little bit better right here. I think I'm wired differently than that. Or maybe I'm just lazy. Who knows?
Sometimes he has dreams about bridges of our songs.
I've done that before.
Really?
Cool. I have woken up and gone, oh, I remember. Yeah. I remember it.
He's like, I know how to end it. And I was like, he's like, I dreamt it. And I'm like, no way. And the next time we got together, he did it. I was like, that's fucking great. Yeah. So
I love the fact that there's a part of your brain that is still thinking creatively, even when you're not conscious. It's still kind of doing the same things you're doing when you're awake.
So when you're refining a bit, do you do like we do a lot? When you're in New York, you're not driving a bunch. We're driving a lot. And a lot of our songs you get a start and then you drive in some kind of monotonous task or a shitty day job or pushing a dolly or something.
I bet in the shower for you.
Shower might be.
I'm going for walks. Whenever I go for a long walk, usually by myself. With other people, it can be fun, but when you're by yourself and there's just like white noise, you're just in your head, and that's where a lot of the stuff ends up happening. Long walks, showers, places where you cannot be distracted, which by the way becomes it is so much harder now. That's one thing that has become significantly harder over the last 10 years is there's more distractions now. Phones and screens, it's very easy to either get lazy or complacent or distracted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you can convince yourself you're doing something by scrolling on your phone. But I'm reading an historical document here.
Right.
You're still wasting time on your phone. It doesn't matter what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
You could be doing something better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's useful because all this that's part of the thought process. But how many times am I just looking at baseball stats? And to be honest, a lot. You
That's
know,
right.
and there's never been a baseball stat joke. Every baseball joke I've ever tried has failed. Like, you know, I'm not. It
Yeah,
really, I mean, basketball and football, I get more laughs out if I do attempt a sports joke. Baseball, people are just like, It's like baseball's gotten so boring to people, even jokes about baseball are unbearable. Like just the
Yeah.
topic.
They're like
Yeah.
baseball. Ugh.
I
We
gotta think
know
about
it's
this.
boring, it's long, pastime, all that.
So what do you have coming up for you in the next few months?
Well, tomorrow, I don't know when this comes up, but November 30th, which is tomorrow as of today's recording, I have a Netflix show coming out called Snack versus Chef. It's a food competition show that I host with Megan Stalter, who is incredibly funny. And it's kind of amazing because I don't think I ever imagined myself doing that sort of thing, you know? And I think in my 20s, I don't think I would have taken the gig. Partly because I don't think I understood what the industry was and how opportunities, you know, they don't always come when you want them to come. And, and also I don't think I had the range I have now. I think I was so wedded into like, I talk about my beliefs on society and politics, and that's what I do. And I'm going to be like Lenny Bruce, and I'm going to talk about the big things. And as I'm getting older, I'm like, I can do that and still do other stuff. I can do that and still, pay my rent. I can do that and still get fed. And I can do that and still have fun. I mean, like, I like the show's called Snack versus Chef. I love snacks. Comedians eat lots of garbage. I'm well versed in the various things you can eat when you're bored or when there's nothing else or when you just need something to fulfill a sweet tooth. It's
What's your favorite savory snack?
The savory snack include like chocolates and stuff, or
no, savory would be no sweet.
Oh man, this is hard. That is a really good question.
Are you a Slim Jim guy?
No. I like beef jerky. I don't think that's it. I'm trying to think. Is there a chip that I'm crazy about?
So you have a sweet tooth then. You're a sweet tooth person. So what's your favorite sweet tooth? What's your sweet tooth snack?
Reese's Pieces. The butter, the cups are great, but Reese's Pieces for sure. Starburst. I mean, I think people have neglected the 100 grand bar for way too long. I feel like people forget how great that bar is because they're distracted. It's like a mix of Milky Way and Crunch bars.
Okay.
It's like it has like the caramel element and plus that rice element.
Oh my god, I'm on right now.
What about the
so good.
What about the Zero bar? Were you ever into that? It's a little.
What is
I never got into that.
It was not that great, but they used to pitch it when I was a kid as the Inside Out candy bar. It was like, but it was really just white chocolate on the outside, I think.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's complete marketing, but it was a white candy bar, and it wasn't that great, but I used to eat it because I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Charleston Chew to me is the least it's the most underappreciated candy bar. I'm a huge Charleston Chew fan.
Was that butterscotch?
Was there a marathon bar that was kind of did this? It was like a whole foot worth of caramel or something, and it was intertwined.
Ooh.
I'm gonna have to Google this, but I'm pretty sure I don't think they make them anymore. But literally a foot of candy.
I always like the Hershey milk chocolate covered almond bar. That's the one.
Solid.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I still am a bigger fan, I think, of Cadbury's chocolate over Hershey's chocolate.
I see a pattern with you. You like the small ones that you can just kind of pop in your not the
the big one. It feel less guilty.
Yeah, I was about to say you don't really have to keep up with how many you're eating, but you're not eating a whole candy bar. You might eat 3 candy bars worth of.
That is correct, 100%. It's all a mind game because there's something about eating a whole candy bar that makes you feel like there were so many other things I could have eaten. How come I didn't have self-control? Why didn't I just take a bite out of it and save it? But when you're eating like 40 minis, it's basically like 8 bars, and
you're like, I'm just snacking.
No, it becomes the thing you're not even thinking about. Oh, let's pop another chocolate in my mouth. No way this is going to hurt me. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, maybe 3 more, like 10 times.
What's your favorite beverage?
Oh, like
Like on the road beverage that you're gonna grab, you know, when you get Reese's Pieces, you're at the convenience store, you grab the Reese's
You're
Pieces.
just gonna go for it.
Yeah,
I mean,
on the
if
road.
I feel like being bougie,
Yeah.
and there's like a fancy shop around, I'll get those harmless harvest coconut waters, the ones that are pink. I
Go with
love
the
that.
Reese's Pieces.
Expecting that.
And then if I'm being real bougie, and I'm like, nah, I want to pay for overpriced coconut water that's pink. Other than that, I mean, in terms, I root beer. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge root beer fan. I love trying local root beers when I'm in different cities. If they have like a local like brewery or something, I try to find one. Like I just love root beer. Sometimes sarsaparilla too.
Yeah.
And coffee, which I don't really think really counts, but I'm snobbish about it. To the point I go to when you travel, do you use Yelp and try to figure out in advance which coffee shops or restaurants you want to go to?
Oh yeah, before we even go, well, we got 4 people to worry about, so it's not just you.
That's
You gotta
right.
all right, where can we all eat, and what time are we going to be? Like,
yeah,
we don't ever, or Raelyn and I don't ever eat right before we play, so that's dinner time. So it's usually late at night where we gotta can we get a pizza to hold? Can we, instead of having to stop at Crystal or something on the way in?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't eat before I go on stage either. I feel too anxious. I eat after. I'm really hungry after I get off stage.
Oh yeah, it's
How
great
come
after.
you two? What's your like? For me, it's like I'm worried about feeling too full, feeling sleepy, burping. Like there's all these things I just don't want. Is that the same reason why you don't?
Yeah. Well, your body uses a lot of energy to digest food too, and you need a lot of energy up on stage to play and sing, and also just to perform.
We made that mistake recently. We ate. I mean, maybe 3 hours before we played.
Yeah.
And even that was just too much. We were just
we couldn't even talk to the people that I'm like, I'm sorry, we just ate and we don't usually eat.
After sound check, people wanting to talk. They were like, "Can we got to go back and try and take a nap before we play?"
We need to sleep this off.
I mean, I remember for a time I put like yogurt on my rider because I'm like, oh, a little bit of yogurt, not the most unhealthy thing, will fill me up. And I'm like, you idiot, you have to talk. And now you got all this phlegm because you eat a yogurt. It's like the dumbest thing to eat before you're supposed to talk for an hour. Like, really ridiculous.
Yeah, it does cause phlegm. You're right.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
You just be like,
okay, Hari, before I let you go, when's the first time you remember hearing about my grandpa, Willie Nelson? Do you know?
Oh, God. Oh.
Country music singer?
I mean, come on, yeah.
I'm joking.
I'm well aware of Willie Nelson. I mean, it's funny. I knew of him as a pop cultural figure more than as a musician because like he was referenced all the time growing up, right? And usually it was connected to weed or connected to like being like super like progressive minded. And there was a certain image of Willie Nelson, but I hadn't listened to his music until recent years. And I'm like, oh, he's great. I just discovered Willie Nelson. Like
Uncle Jesse can sing.
but yeah, it's like he's mentioned so much. Like he's such a unique figure. He's singular. He's like he is who he is, and I think that's pretty amazing. He's like an evergreen reference.
It's so funny. Chris Christopherson was that way for me. When I grew up, it was just a movie star. And it was many years later until I found out he actually could write amazing songs.
Really good songs.
Yeah.
He was like
in
the movies and on like those made for TV movies. He was like Burt Reynolds, hot dude, Never knew he wrote songs.
So was he an actor first or was he always doing both at the same time?
He was probably writing songs first.
He was writing songs first. Yeah.
Well, first he was like a Navy SEAL or something, and then
I don't know.
Flying helicopters, and then he came here. Probably from his songwriting and just meeting people, he got into the movies. But yeah, he was big time movie star in the late 70s.
Yeah, my mom loved him.
Chris Christopherson.
Yeah.
Did your grandfather ever have like, I don't know how to like rivals or like other musicians that he like thought of as like what are they doing? I just want to see what they're doing compared to what I'm doing. Or was he like,
No.
did that never? He was always
I don't
like,
think so.
I
don't
bet-
think I mean, probably.
He knew. I don't even know him. I've met him, been around him a little bit, but I wouldn't imagine that would be something he would ever share
No.
with anybody if he did.
huh?
Everybody's got to have some, but maybe not. I mean, I doubt he ever had like a burning
Okay.
rival.
He not a rival, but he always looked up to like Hank Williams. They all did, Chris
Yeah.
and all them all looked up to Hank Williams Sr. and he loved Django Reinhardt. Who
Yeah,
was
that's his
a
guitar playing hero.
guitar playing hero. So I'm sure he wanted to strive to be like those guys, but he doesn't. I can't know. He's just always been so inclusive with everyone. He's
When I think about it, the question is actually more about insecurity, right? Like, was he ever insecure about
I'm
music?
sure.
Did he ever? Everyone
yeah.
is, right?
Well,
Like,
Nashville told him to.
They basically threw him out.
Yeah.
They were like, "We like your songs, but you can't sing. So give us your songs." And but there's that story of him like at Tootsie's laying in the middle of the road at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
because he was like, "I'm done. I'm never going to make it." And no car came, so he just got up out of the road and walked back
Yeah,
and had
he-
another beer. Right?
Yeah, Tootsie's right down on Broadway, which
He didn't make it till he was in his 40s.
yeah, he was 42, 43 when he made it.
But he went to New York to make a gospel record once they basically ran him out of Nashville. And then the guys he was recording with, Jerry Wexler, and I forget the other guy, had an extra week or two in the studio and like, just put down some of yours. And that's when he did Shotgun Willie. And they just let him
The
do his
Redheaded
thing.
Stranger, right?
Oh,
Was
yeah.
it
Redheaded Stranger, I think. Yeah, you're right.
And then he moved out to Texas and started playing around there and then got Waylon to come out there.
If
Wow.
there's any rival he has, it might be with the city of Nashville.
Yeah.
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
When he played in Nashville after that, was there an added like?
Oh, I'm sure there was some of that.
Oh, I know there is. He's always said that I'm the best part of Nashville. I'm the only Nelson here. He doesn't want to come here. And I don't mean it that way. He
It's
loves
not
all
the
his
people
fans.
of Nashville. It's the Nashville music
It's the
business, and the
business.
industry, and all that. Because
Yeah.
they did throw him out, and he's been able to basically hold his sensitive middle finger up to him
Yes.
in the most
ever
polite and
since.
loving way possible.
And now they kiss his ass, I'm sure, but he's, so over it.
That makes me happy.
Me
yeah.
too.
But he's
That's
such a good
great.
person. He would never say these things, He,
We'll say it for him.
yeah. So it's just me talking for him.
This is all allegedly, by the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Hari, for
Yeah.
doing this with us.
Oh
For
my
doing the same, man. It
God.
was great.
It was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to do it. It's nice talking about art with people who aren't just comedians who are doing a different art form. I love to see where things overlap and where things are different. It's really cool.
It's been
Yeah.
wild talking to people. And again, like we said, everybody's got a whole different, not whole different, but the processes are completely different. It's just
Yeah.
interesting where they overlap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll reach out to you in a few months and we'll catch up again on another podcast or something. See
I
what you're
would
doing next.
love that. My next special will hopefully comes out early next year. So I'd
Perfect.
love to talk about it when it comes out.
Yeah, let's do
Absolutely.
that. Okay, cool.
It's nice to meet you,
Awesome.
man.
Thanks,
It's
man.
nice to meet you both. Definitely take care.
Hari Kondabolu. Hari Kondabolu.
It's my favorite comedian.
Yep, that was another good one. Enjoyed talking to that fella. Anyway, enjoy your groceries.
Don't be an asshole.
I know your mama's name.
Did we cheers yet?
Enjoy your cigarette.